Hello, and welcome to MagicGatheringStrat. I'm Peyton. It has been quite some time since I've submitted any content for the channel or any articles for the website. After this hiatus, however, I am pleased to be back, hopefully submitting lots of stuff for the community, despite some computer issues trying to smite me occasionally. I believe I've worked out the kinks, so it is time for me to do a deck tech, aka primer, walkthrough, whatever, on Polymorph. This deck, Dan actually requested I do this deck quite a while ago. He was very interested. He put most of these cards on his radar for building an Eternal format deck, which really says something for an Eternal player like Dan. So, Polymorph revolves around the strategy of a few key cards. I'm going to go through some card explanations, basic little strategies. I'm going to cover this deck here, which is the main deck from an article on mtgostrat.com, which you should definitely check out. It is basically a very texty version of this right here, but it isn't super long, and it could be an additional resource if you would like more information or you don't want to come back and watch this video 100 times. So, let's get started here with some basic interactions. Polymorph and Proteus Staff are the two cards that make a turn 3 Emrakul the Eon's Torn happen in this deck. The goal is, obviously, to play this guy as fast as humanly possible. Emrakul is the fatty of choice. Really is. It is the #1 fatty in lots of decks. Sneaky show. It sees play in things like Hypergenesis. All kinds of decks. Emrakul, even ramp decks. Elves runs an Emrakul copy, I believe. But basically, yeah, Emrakul, drop it as fast as possible. Polymorph destroys a creature and searches the deck to find another to replace it. Proteus Staff puts a creature on the bottom of your library, and then you have to reveal cards from the top of your deck until you find another, and then the rest of the cards go on the bottom. So the two cards are very similar in their nuances. Both can only be activated at sorcery speed. I'm going to put the little text box here and highlight it so that you can read that if you aren't perfectly familiar with this card while I continue talking. So the goal is obviously to destroy something that will be a creature on the battlefield, but not in the library. In this case, we have three options. We have Flare Husk, we have Wind Zendikon, and we have Mishra's Factory. So Flare Husk is just a living weapon. It makes a black germ token when it enters the battlefield. CMC 1, pretty simple. It works well, especially since it needs colorless mana, so you could even play Mishra's Factory and use that mana to play a Flare Husk. Very acceptable strategy, just fine. Mishra's Factory is just a manland, turns into a 2/2 for 1 colorless, and it works pretty well for the strategy. Wind Zendikon is just not the best card. It does prove its worth in this deck, though, a bit. It turns an island into a 2/2 flyer. That flyer can poke in a little bit of damage early on, not that much to make a big difference, but sometimes it matters. Also, when the island is destroyed to Polymorph, since the Zendikon turns the island into the creature, the Zendikon goes to the graveyard, and the island goes back to the hand. So it does recycle the blue land. It can be helpful if the goal is to perhaps activate another Polymorph if necessary. Making sure you have ample blue mana is always a good thing. So Zendikon does prove its worth here a bit. To help things go off a bit faster, there are several ramp cards here. We've got Lotus Petal, Chrome Mox, and Ancient Tomb. I'll start with the zero-cost artifacts here. Lotus Petal is pretty much a must-have for this deck. They aren't super cheap, almost $3 a piece at the moment, I believe, but it's such a good card. For free and extra mana, yeah, that'd be great. Sure, we could run Black Lotus if this was a vintage deck. It's not a vintage deck, and it would be really fun to have a turn 1 Polymorph if Black Lotus was legal. That would be fun, but unfortunately Lotus Petal is the best replacement. Such a good card. If you can, please get this. It will make the deck run a lot faster. In many cases, a turn 3 Emrakul will hit the board because of Lotus Petal. Chrome Mox is another good card. Zero-cost artifact with imprint. The main issue with it is price. I believe they hover around $7, $8 at the moment. It's not a cheap card, so a 3 of is the best this deck can do for budget reasons. It's still great. It removes a superfluous blue spell, perhaps a digger you don't need. Maybe Spell Pierce if you don't need that against a creature-heavy strategy, and turns it into extra mana. It's a good card. So Chromox is valuable in this strategy. Ancient Tomb is a little iffy. It is a Soul Ring effect, which pushes the deck forward a turn. Possibility, not a probability, but a possibility of a turn 2 Polymorph. Probably not going to happen. Once again, probably not going to happen, but it's possible. Really, it's just good at assuring that turn 3 Polymorph, turn 3 Proteus Staff activation. It's a good card. Once again, main issue price. They recently spiked significantly. I believe they're around $10 at the moment. It's ridiculously high. So there's only 2 copies played in the deck. If you happen to have Ancient Tombs, use them. They're good. Replace Islands, maybe Ghost Quarter with them. But really 2 does a job just fine. Let's talk about digging a bit here. We obviously want this to go off smoothly as possible. Ponder, Preordain, and Brainstorm. A playset of each of these allows the combo to go off without a hitch in many cases. It helps find the combo pieces. It helps make sure, in many cases, that this guy does not end up in your hand or near the top of your library, which is not what you want. You want it to be buried in case you end up in a long game where you're digging through cards to try to find a solution or just to go off at all. So Ponder is really the best of the 3 in this case. It allows you to reshuffle the cards you may not want, which is really especially good in this deck. It's still a cantrip, and it's still very similar to a Scry 3. So it's quite a good card. Preordain is second best. It's still very good. Scry 2, then draw a card. Don't need one of these? Bottom. Don't need one of these? Bottom. Don't need one of these? Bottom. Don't need this? Obviously, that'll go straight to the bottom. And you can still draw a card after that. Both really good cards. Brainstorm is also a great card. In the context of this deck, though, it loses some of its value because there are not a lot of shuffle effects. The only other shuffle effect is Ponder, and you're most likely not going to Ponder right after a Brainstorm. So it's still a good card. It digs fairly deep. You can remove stuff from your hand that you don't necessarily want there at the moment. End of turn, still draw 2 cards. Pretty good. Pretty good card. Draw 2 cards you want. And then draw a card you may necessarily not want. Brainstorm's a good card. 11 Islands. Very self-explanatory. It's blue mana. I don't need to talk about that anymore. Mishra's Factory, once again. Hit it with Polymorph. Hit it with Proteus Staff. End of story. Ghost Quarter equates to a poor man's wasteland. It will take out a duel and allow your opponent to go find a basic. It's not incredible. It's not as good as Wasteland, but it's cheap and really helps eliminate the issue of dual lands, providing all kinds of color fixing, and I have had this card do some serious damage against 4-color decks when they may be relying on all dual lands and very few basics. Sometimes this card doesn't hit a basic, or they don't have a basic of the type they necessarily need to replace the dual land they lost. It just screws with the decks quite a bit. It's a good card. I definitely recommend playing it, but like the Ancient Tomb, if you really wanted to, it could be replaced by Islands. This covers everything in the main deck here. I'm going to quickly go over the sideboard. Proteus Staff, there's an extra copy in here to round out the playset. Bring in Proteus Staff if you're taking out Diggers, because these Diggers really make sure that you have one of these 2 to go off when you need to. And when you remove the ability to find, that critical combo card, it's nice to have an extra combo card, just in case. Obviously not so good if your opponent brings in Pithing Needle, but it's still a good card. Definitely worth the copy on the sideboard. Woodfall Primus is the only other fatty in the deck. It's good not because of its body. A 6/6 trample is not incredibly impressive, but its abilities can be so helpful. Taking out a Jace the Mind Sculptor is really hard for this deck if it were not for Woodfall Primus. If they start Fate Sealing you, it can be obnoxious. Go off, get a Primus, no more Jace. End of story. No problem. I will issue a cautionary statement when bringing in Woodfall Primus. Be careful. If you're a gambler, bring in Woodfall Primus more often, because when you hit a Polymorph and if you haven't directly figured out which of these two is going to be higher up in the library, there's no way of telling which one you're going to hit. You could really want an Imracool to smash face, and you could end up hitting a Woodfall Primus and having it be absolutely, completely destroyed by something bigger. I can't really think of anything off the top of my head right now that would be bigger, that would be as fast. Sneaky Show, maybe? Grizzlebrand, something of the sort. But, yes, Woodfall Primus does prove its worth. Terastodon is a replacement for this guy. If you want a 9/9 that's going to destroy 3 non-creature permanents instead of 2, use Terastodon. Both are good cards. Whichever suits you better, you can decide. The sideboard also has more protection. We've got 3 Mana Leak in 4 days. Basic counterspells. Not Force of Will, because Force of Will is expensive. But Mana Leak is better than Counterspell in this context, because it's an 11 colored mana producers to 9 non-colored mana producers. Main deck for land. So you'll generally end up with 2 islands by the time you need to use this, but you won't always, which is why Mana Leak is preferable, and in a lot of cases, the controller can't pay 3. Daze is, once again, an iffy card based on price. It's not cheap, it's not super expensive, but it is $8 to $10, going up to $15. So it could be omitted. For perhaps Spell Snare comes to mind as being a good replacement for Daze. If you have Dazes, use them. They're great. They can be brought in against counterspell heavy decks. Very helpful against counterspell heavy decks. Islands do serve a purpose. They're not just filler here. Anti-Wasteland. If you find these guys are getting hit too much by Wasteland, replace them with colored mana. You won't hurt the deck that much once again. Little extra mana never hurt. Also, if you bring in Dazes, you may find it beneficial to bring these in just to guarantee that on turn 1 you have a better chance of having an island to use if you need it to play Daze. The last card on the sideboard is Sleight of Hand. It's an okay cantrip. It's not the best. It's better than Quicken, but it's still not incredible. I recommend it if you just want to dig a little more and set up an absolutely perfect situation where you've got counter magic available and a backup plan. That's where you want to bring in Sleight of Hand. This covers everything there really is to talk about for this particular build of the deck. The total price is about $112. It is expensive, but for a Legacy deck that does really well in quite a few matchups, I've found it to be worth it. If you would like to purchase the deck, I would recommend it. It performs quite well. If you're still having sticker shock, I'm now going to cover 2 decks that are cheaper, but still polymorph. Let's take a look at this version right here. This version was a suggestion from Drinkard. It has evolved quite a bit since he originally posted a comment on my article suggesting that Colony Garden and Crop Rotation, like from the Pauper Infect deck, could be used in place of the oh-so-terrible Wenzindicon, and it adds color, which adds options to the deck. I went ahead and built it, and I've had decent success so far. I believe I'm 2-2 at the moment, which is good for a deck that is very young in its conception. It is quite a bit different. It has very few... Oh my. Okay, that's an issue. First of all, I notice I have 2 Ponders in the sideboard and 4 main deck. Don't do that. Those should be preordains. Mistake there. Sorry about that. Anyways, there's less digging main deck here. A bit more protection. We've got 2 Moment's Peace. Moment's Peace is very handy against aggressive decks, especially ones that hit early on. Elves. This has been good against aggro decks. I believe I went 2-1 against Elves, and Moment's Peace really was helpful, especially after I brought in the other 2 from the sideboard. The decks are very similar. Awakening Zone has been included. It adds extra polymorph fodder, it's a little bit of mana ramp, and even a chump blocker. When necessary, Awakening Zone takes care of it. So I cut it down from a playset after a few matches with this. It is not incredibly cheap in the mana department, so it's a little bit better if you want to go a little slower with the deck. Also, the deck runs 3 more lands. We've got 3 Breeding Pool. Breeding Pool is my duel of choice in this deck. I believe the cost is about $90 here, somewhere around $85, $90. Sideboard is pretty similar. That is once again a mistake. Don't do this. Don't put 2 Ponder in the sideboard and 4 main deck. Don't be idiotic like me. Okay. Mana Leaks and Dazes, as usual. Lots of extra counter spells. I tried Iona, Shield of Emeria, and Terastodon on the sideboard. That was just optional. Iona because I wanted to see how it would perform. And I also brought it in the Elves matchup, and was able to get Iona, I believe, game 3, and choose green. I did it 3rd turn. And from that point, they were unable to go off, and I just beat them with a 7/7 flyer until the game was over. Other notable changes, I switched out an Emrakul for a Progenitus main deck, also for flavor, to see how it performed as well. Progenitus is a lot harder to get rid of. Oblivion Ring says, bye-bye Emrakul, super fast, and this deck doesn't have a lot of answers. Yes, Spell Pierce, Daze, Mana Leak, but you may not have it, and it may be better just to have a 10/10 that is really, really hard to get rid of as compared to a 15/15 that destroys everything. That may be better. So time will tell. I've had success with both. So this has been enjoyable to play. It's definitely a different flavor. Thank you, Drinkard. I have had some success. I will probably try to keep a little update going on that particular article as to the success of this deck here. Because if it ends up that these 2 wins that I've had so far are the only ones I'll ever get, probably don't invest in this version yet. It's still in the rough, a diamond in the rough. Anyways, that's enough about this deck. $80 to $90, somewhere in that range, on MTGO Traders. It's been fun to play with. Now, this deck, the next deck I'm going to show you, is quite possibly my favorite rendition here. This deck right here is $20 Polymorph. I'm about to show you a Polymorph deck that costs $20. I'm going to load it up right now. $20 Polymorph right here. Right here in the video, right after I say this, I'm going to put in a screenshot that I took of the entire deck priced out on January 4th, I believe it was, right now. See that? $20.77. So cheap for a Legacy deck. I will confess that I have not played this version yet. Keep an eye out on the YouTube channel for gameplay of this. I'm going to do my utmost to submit gameplay directly after this. As soon as I can, I'm going to get some gameplay of this up and see how it performs. Also, the article will be updated to include this list, especially if it is successful. Changes include Index replaced Brainstorm, saved a few dollars there. Spell Snare ended up replacing Chrome Mox, because Spell Snare is about 50 cents, and it just adds more protection and a little bit of less ramp. All the non-basics except for Mishra's Factory were replaced by islands. A lot of this otherwise remains the same. There are no daisies in the sideboard, there are Primus in the sideboard. And by the way, guys, all of these prices do include the sideboard. So if you want to build a completely different sideboard than the ones I have here, that's fine. I'm an advocate of changing and tweaking your sideboard based on what you encounter, how you like to play, and what you just feel is best in your environment, metagame, however and whenever, wherever you intend to take this deck. But otherwise, lots of counter magic in the sideboard here. Place that a sleight of hand because Index doesn't draw cards. Sleight of hand does. Although this digs quite deep. Index digs 5 cards down as opposed to the 3 that Brainstorm could. So it's really a good card here. For 2 cents, playset's worth it. But otherwise, I also replaced the Emrakul's with the Progenitus. 2 copies of Progenitus in this case, because the cheapest Emrakul you can get on MTGO Traders is the foil promo version for around $5. The cheapest Progenitus you can get is 90 cents from Modern Masters. And it's still super powerful to go off with the Polymorph Proteus staff. So this is $20 Polymorph right here. I really, really look forward to trying this out. Keep an eye on the channel. I really hope this deck has success. I've never played it before, but I really want to try it out. So thank you again for watching. This has been Polymorph Deck Tech Walkthrough Primer. I really don't know what to call it, with Petyon here. Please, once again, leave a comment. Go ahead and like this video if you enjoyed hearing a bit about the deck, or you build the deck and have success. Also comment. I'd really love to hear what you guys think, and I like feedback. I like constructive criticism. So, thank you very much for watching.